everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Atlantic CIL podcast. I'm Donald Campbell, the Executive Director of the Atlantic CIL, and I'm here with Marily Gonzalez, the Executive Director of the, which I want to make sure I get your CIL right, because you have HIP, which Brian, who we had on the podcast earlier, the Heightened Center for Independent Living, and then you have your CIL. What is it? It's a branch under HIP, correct?
Yes, correct. We're actually one CIL with two county offices, Hudson County, which is where I'm located, and the Bergen County, which is our main office. We have Brian, who is our CEO, and I am the VP.
Yeah, see, you guys get the president and VP titles. I was always jealous of that. I get to have a director title.
It doesn't mean anything.
And I realized, I'm like, yes, some nonprofits do that. That's how they.
Yes. I'm considered the Chief Operating Officer, which just means that Brian and I oversee both offices.
So, Marily, on this podcast, we talked a lot about CILs, and I'm always curious because CILs are so unique. How did you get involved? Like, what is your origin story? How did you get here?
So my grandmother was blind. She lost her vision to glaucoma when she was in her early 50s. So when she relocated to New Jersey from Puerto Rico, when she retired, she needed assistance registering for CBVI, the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I was probably about 15, so I was her translator. I would go with her, help her out. A few years later, my godmother, Joanne Straczynski, she started losing her mobility due to muscular sclerosis. So she has MS. During that time, she was starting to get involved, and she also started to lose her vision, also with CBVI and with her local Center for Independent Living, which was HIP. That was my first introduction to Centers for Independent Living and the things they did. I was about 17 years old. So I would help her apply for benefits. I would help her read things and get her mobility trainings and things like that from the Commission for the Blind. When I was in college at Kane University, I needed to do a few internship hours, and there was a part-time job as an intake worker for the Hudson County CIL. And I interviewed, so I had some personal experience with disability. And I was bilingual, and they were looking for someone that can help the underserved minority population in Hudson County. So I started working there as an intake worker. My original goal was to work there until I graduated undergrad and then move on. I was a history major at that point.
Awesome.
Yeah. Obviously, 28 years later, I didn't move on.
Yes. That's the thing about, like, there's something about CILs, like, once you get drawn in, it's like, it's hard to leave sometimes.
It was. I think I developed a bond with the families, the consumers that we were working with. It was about 1997. So, there was still a lot of things that were not right. Within services, within education, within the whole social service system. So it was kind of important to me. We didn't have any other bilingual speaking staff person in our whole area. And that was a big disservice for the huge Latino population in Jersey City.
Yeah, I could imagine. So we hired our transition specialist, who was our first bilingual employee, yesterday. I think, thank God we had them, because we're doing, our pre-eds are fee for service, and half of the clients are primarily Spanish speakers.
Wow.
And because of Anna, who was on this podcast too, I'm like, I don't know how else we would have done this, because it's such a big population, and if we didn't have this person, we wouldn't be doing our jobs. We're supposed to serve everybody. So I can see why, I understand why that skill set is so important, because there's a whole group of the system is hard enough to navigate as it is. And then you throw in not knowing the language. And Anna was able to explain that to them in a way that they understood. And one of the things they said to her was, "No, you're a good translator. You also picked up on our slang, the way we speak it."
And it's very interesting you say that, because currently I have a staff of 15, and they range from different parts of Latin America, the Caribbean, and they all speak a little different dialect. And I think that, that was important. And it also showed, people assume Spanish is Spanish, but it's not
Yes.
truly across the board. And it really changed a lot of things. We were able to link people to a lot of services. Having a disability is difficult enough. Then
Yes.
when you are dealing with, a urban impoverished community, and then you throw in the fact that they don't speak English, there's a host of issues, and also lack of services that they could be utilizing, and they're not, because they don't know
Right.
they exist.
Right. Or if they do know they exist, they have questions about it that anybody does, but they want answered in a way they understand. Like, why is this government, we had some people asking, like, why are they asking for my ID? Why? Like, they want to understand that, because, and if you understand underserved populations, you understand why they can be nervous about giving the government information. So having somebody that I can explain them to it like bridges that gap.
Absolutely.
So how did you start off as an intake worker and you just worked your way up to being vice
Yeah,
president?
pretty much. I started as a minority. I started as an intake worker, then they needed a full-time minority outreach worker. And I was like, you know what? I'll hold off to go for my master's. And I started doing that. We started growing. So originally, just to give you a little history, the Hudson office was just a small satellite office. It was a small branch. The Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services had some extra money for independent living. So they funded HIP and started this small satellite office. It was just a woman, the old director by the name of Kathy Wood. She was my supervisor. She brilliant woman. She had cerebral palsy. She also had vision loss. And at one point she used a walker, then crutches. But anyway, this woman was awesome. It was just her and I. We started seeing how much of a need it was. And we started having the opportunity of growing. Then finally, in about 1997, the federal government allocated money for a Hudson County Part C cell, and we were blessed with our own office. And we moved out of DVR. And back in 1996 is where I met Brian Fitzgibbons.
In DVR.
At DVR, yes. Whoever knew that was going to be my boss one day.
Yes.
Yes. Then after that, we branched out to different programs throughout the years, from Medicaid services to social service-based programs, to a program called Global Options, which was a fee-for-service for Medicaid. And I kind of just traveled the office from program to program until about 8 years ago, Kathy Wood decided to retire. And I put in for the job, and I was blessed I got it. And I worked hand in hand with Eileen Goff for, I guess, about 25 years before she retired.
So tell us about Eileen, because she was a legend in like IL world, especially New Jersey. And,
yes.
And tell us about her, because she just did a lot of amazing things.
Yes. Eileen Goff, she was blind, brilliant, also very brilliant woman, came from, a different time. She was born in the 40s. So life was very different for her growing up. Luckily, she grew up in a home where her vision loss had to take a second place. Her father and her family owned Bayway Circle Lumberyard and Palisade Lumber. So she grew up in a very business-oriented home, and she brought that to the table. She was a wonderful advocate, not only for the rights of people with disabilities, but also women's rights. She was my biggest mentor. She was just a people person. She had a good heart. She was very, very involved with the ADA and how it should be implemented. She used to tell me we should have ADA police and the world would be a better place.
Yes.
So, she had a lot to offer. She was a wonderful role model, from skiing to cross-country trips. She was a world traveler. She just kind of just the way she lived life kind of make you understand that disability, with the right accommodations and resources, is it's really something that you can be fully integrated in every aspect of life.
Yes, and I think what Phil's always preaching and trying to get across to people that disability is a natural part of life and a natural part of
Yes.
human nature, and we need the world to just accept that and build in accommodations in all their systems, and the world would be a more effective place. And I think that, Eileen, from your story you're telling, I always say it's so important of that environment you're around. If they're setting those expectations of like, no, you can do stuff, you can work, you can live your life. Like, I always think that was really important for me. Like, my parents were always like, so when you go to college, instead of you'll never go, like they set that expectation. So, and just always tell people, like sometimes sometimes parents will say to me, oh, my kid will never work. And they're like 15, 14. I'm like, well, we don't know that yet. Like,
We don't know that yet.
Let's not set that expectation low already. There's a lot of life to live. There's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of things to do. So
and there's so many resources now, and adaptive equipment and so many accommodations that exist. We get a lot of parents like that, that are like, he'll never work. And then we have parents that have children that are very capable of working, but unfortunately their financial dependency on their Social Security or their benefits scares them.
Yep, and that's a great thing to talk about too. We talk about that on the podcast too. How the system doesn't encourage independence. Like, I do when my people come to me and say, should I work? Like, it is a trade-off. Like, well, what is the job you're taking worth losing your benefits? Is it worth losing your insurance? And there are, as we know, there are things in Social Security you can do to not lose them, but that's a lot of work too. Like, Social Security doesn't come to your house and do stuff for you if you do it wrong.
And the support services are not there to encourage people to work. And unfortunately, the system does not encourage them to work. It almost penalizes them for wanting to be independent.
Right.
And it's definitely a huge flaw. It's a huge flaw because, you can't set expectations if you think that at the end of the road, you're going to hurt yourself.
Right. And I always say, like, the system has so many contradictions in it. Like, it says to people with disabilities, well, we want you to work, but not too much. We want you to save money, but you better not save that much money. And, you should shoot for the stars, but don't work that job or that job. Like, so it's like there's so many contradictions. And again, what cells are doing every day, because when I tell people, sometimes they'll complain to us. I'm sure you'll get this too. I'm like, don't complain to me. I'm on your side. I didn't make this Medicaid rule. Go call your congressman. I didn't make this Social Security rule. Go bother them. So, but those are kind of the challenges. What do you think sets cells apart from other disability organizations? What kind of attracted you? Was there anything that you liked that was different about cells? Kind of the philosophy.
I think the overall respect and equality that is presented, that sense of dignity and inclusion that the centers provide that no other agency provides. See, in my experience, many agencies, they have their mission, they have their goals, they have that population that they cater to. And us as Centers for Independent Living, we cater to everyone.
Right.
Anyone that self-identifies with a disability, whether it's physical, sensory, mental. We have consumers that have Down syndrome. We also have consumers that have spinal cord injuries. We have consumers that have cerebral palsy, that have MS, that
anxiety,
exactly. Anxiety. We have individuals that are referred from mental health. We have individuals that are referred from rehab. So there's not one group. We represent all. And we represent all those individuals that experience some type of limitation. And our representation is to promote that full inclusion, to promote that equality, to promote, that respect, and to keep them informed. I think that as a Center for Independent Living, one of our biggest jobs is to keep them informed, to keep them empowered. Yes. And I think we're different in that way.
Yes, I always say like one of my sayings at the CIL is it can't be more important to us than it is to you. Like you're the driver in this. Like, we're here to support and assist and help, but you have to lead the efforts because that's what CILs are all about, people with disabilities taking charge of their own lives. So, and I love what you said about the self-identify, because a lot of places there's very strict, like you got to fit in this box and you're working with us for this time and then you're done.
Yeah.
But CILs are not like that. CILs self-identify, because some of the people we work with, like they think they have a disability and they've never gotten a chance yet to get a diagnosis from a doctor or for the government.
Yeah.
So it's a real low barrier to entry, which makes it appealing to a lot of people. Like, whereas some other places it's higher, and you can work with us for as long as you need to.
Absolutely.
Instead of, I know some places, and I get it, everybody has their different criteria, their different funding. Some places it's like 3-4 months, then you
got to move on. Case closed.
Move on. Whereas us, we have people here that been with us since we opened. I'm sure you have that.
I
years.
I have consumers that have been part of HIP for as long as my employment there.
Right. And that's when it's cool to see. And I love what you said too, because when I first heard about CIL, I was asking to be on the board, and it was a disability organization. And I was like, oh, I hope it's not one of those disability organizations that's like patronizing, like that. Like it's like, oh, look at the poor disabled people and the sad kid over there, and we're here to help, And I was like, oh, I can't do that with my life. Like, but then I looked up CILs, and I'm like, oh, I like this. It's all about self-respect and self-empowerment and self-advocacy. I'm like, and personal responsibility. I'm like, okay, this is more my jam. This is my thing. So I think that's what attracts a lot of people. Like, we want to help people with disabilities, but we don't want to patronize them. Like, we don't want to, we don't want to pat them on the head. Like,
yes, definitely not. And I think that that's absolutely a good thing. I see colleagues from other agencies, they're like, oh, wow, you're a saint. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that drives me crazy too. Sorry, guys, if anyone's listening that said that to me, but it drives me crazy too. It's like, why am I a saint? Because I'm getting paid to do a job. Like, and I'm just.
And I always say that. I'm like, I don't do this for free, right?
Yes.
Like, okay, that might make me a saint if I came here every day and did this for free. But, I think it's that whole respect versus pity. And it's such a thin line, because people want to help people with disabilities traditionally. However, there's that line of you're helping them to improve the quality of their life. It's not charity, and we don't provide charity at the Center for Independent Living.
Exactly.
We provide support systems with the goal of full independence, and another thing is we don't measure our goals.
Yes.
And a lot of agencies do. We don't measure our goals. What may be an objective and a goal for you may not necessarily be for someone else, but when you achieve that, that's a self-achievement.
That's a great point, Marily, because like for some of our people, just making a phone call by themselves to the doctor could be, it could have huge anxiety about that.
Yeah.
And like for some of my people, that's it for that day. Like that's a big goal. And then for others,
and that should be celebrated.
Yes, exactly, because that's what leads you to bigger goals.
Absolutely.
That's what leads you to bigger goals. And I think what CILs will say too is that pity thing undermines people with disabilities. Like you think you're helping, but you're just creating more dependence and more low self-esteem and more like, oh, you're so lucky to get this help. Like stuff like that does not help empower people with disabilities. And I think that I'm glad you're triggered by that too, with the same stuff and God bless you. I'm like, well, God bless me. And like the people we serve, they have challenges, but they're also not victims. They're living their lives. They're trying to figure stuff out. Like they're not, begging for me to show up every day. Like,
oh, absolutely. You just reminded me. We had one of the case managers called us one day. She had a couple. They had some disabilities, and she was like, "Oh my God, I think she's pregnant." And I was like, "Okay." Her biggest concern in the whole world was that this woman with a disability may have a child.
Wow. Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, that's
And
what we're
and
trying.
and granted, this woman didn't even have developmental disability, which also happens within couples. And the way that it was handled was inappropriate and disturbing. The
Right.
assumption that people with disabilities cannot be in successful, healthy relationships and have families is something that has always um
Existed.
existed. Yes, yes. And even medical professionals, unfortunately, you still have a lot of doctors that if they can't fix it, they think it's
Yes.
broken.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's who's writing up what normal is supposed to be or what is broken? How about the acceptance of differences
Right.
instead of the assumption? So it's yeah, it's been a long road. I do see now, after nearly 30 years, where you see more people with disabilities out living their life. You see more services, appropriate services
Yes.
available. But I always feel like it's a mission to get the services, to even get the funding to provide the appropriate services. There's still many barriers that exist.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's always hard because I see the progress, like the fact that I'm here, that I went to law school. Like you said that in 1997 when you were starting, that it would have even been more rare then. It would have been like,
Yeah.
whoa, like so. There's been so much progress made, but still so much work, and it's like that's like the contract. That's the part of our job where it's like you don't want to get too lost in the negative, but you don't want to also forget all the work that's left to be done. Like I always, struggle with that because you're right, it's still out there. Those assumptions are still out there. Giving an example, I've I've worked with people trying to transition them from nursing homes, and one of the things we hear back sometimes it'll be risky for them to be out in the community, and like I get where that comes from, but I also I have to push back on that right away because if that person doesn't want to be there, they're allowed to decide what's risky for them. Like we all make decisions every day that are about managing risk and making our decisions. But nobody takes away our freedom. Like nobody should take away your freedom.
100%. And years ago, I had a new caseworker, and she says to me, "Oh my God, this is like they can't do this. This is not a good idea." And I was like, "Sweetie, it's a decision, but guess why we're here? Because they're entitled to make decisions just
Yes.
like able-bodied people."
Yes.
And she was like, "Oh," and then I think it finally clicked in her. We're not here to make to fix their lives or
Right.
or to tell them what's
Right.
best for them. Okay, we're here to support them and make sure that they have the rights to make the decisions on their own. They're empowered by information. Now, whether they're making good decisions or bad, that's part of being an adult.
Right. And
And if
and yep, exactly. And I always say that, and living with the consequences of your decisions. That's part of freedom.
Yes, yes, and I think that that's what people with disabilities, want. They
Yes.
want to be able to make their own decisions. They don't want decisions made for them. They want to be able to have access to the services that they need to live independently. I don't think that everyone understands that equality and equal access means to everything, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Right, right, right. Like you said, you know how many non-disabled people make decisions all day, every day, all
And no
day
one's
long.
stopping them.
All day long, every day. But then when it's weird, when it comes in the frame of a person with a disability, people get weird. They get weird.
They feel like they have to save them from themselves.
Right.
And I think that's also something that makes us different from other social service type of organizations. I always tell my staff, I said, try to guide them, encourage them not to do that,
Yes.
give them, look, this is some of the things that might happen, teach them that they have to be accountable for their decisions. They can't make a bad decision and then come back
Right.
to us saying, "Oh my God."
Oh,
However, at the end of the day, it should always be their decision.
right. Right. And like I said, that's how you learn things. Some of my best lessons have come from, man, you know,
Yeah, that's growing up. Those are like growing
yeah,
up
that's like
and
growing.
learning from your mistakes. The goal is, to be here when they need that additional support, but you can't help them if you make them dependent
Right,
on you.
right, exactly. Like sometimes we'll get people who will say, well, what if I hire this person with a disability, it doesn't work out? I'm like, how many people without disabilities do you hire and it not work out? Like that's part of life. Like sometimes it doesn't work out. They're not gonna be the first person to lose a job. Like, but giving them that opportunity is what it's
Makes
all
a
about.
difference.
Like
Absolutely.
not presuming that just because the person with a disability is pregnant, that they're not going to be able to live up to the responsibilities of being a parent. If something happens, then that's when they should be held accountable. But don't assume that before anything happens, they just can't do it.
Yes, and they ended up being wonderful parents, both of them. And they
Exactly.
they moved on to have a second child. It was just, like I said, that assumption. I remember the biggest thing was that the gentleman had spina bifida and he was a wheelchair user, and he did have some difficulties with mobility, using one of his hands, and they were like, how are they going to physically care for the child? Well, we're here to help them find resources and support, not
Right.
to judge them,
Right.
and say they can't do it, because
Why are we
it's
assuming they can't figure that out? Like,
exactly,
why are we
exactly.
assuming
So
that?
yeah, so I see a lot of that throughout the years.
Yeah, it's like when you work at a cell, you get those triggers. Like, oh, we're doing this, we're doing the too risky line, or we're doing the what's gonna happen, or can they do it line, and you just get used to pushing back because there are those assumptions built into our society that still exist.
Oh yeah, and even people that decide not to self-identify at moments or at times, but have disabilities, invisible disabilities that are not so obvious to everyone, there's still a community that we work with.
Yes.
And I've heard people say, I was in a meeting one day and the woman said something to me, the presenter, and I didn't hear her. And she was like, excuse me, didn't you hear me? I said, actually, I did not. I wear hearing aids and I had to turn them off because I'm sitting under an air vent.
Yeah.
And her face she said, well, why didn't you tell me? I said, because that's none of your business. I will adapt to it. Okay.
Right. And what do I have to, for every room I have to enter and let people know?
I can't hear everything. Yeah, I said, when we went for our break, I was going to casually move, but now, you've made it an issue. Like, and then you have people like that, it is, if everyone is treated with consideration and respect, whether the assumption is that they have a disability or they don't have a disability, things would get done better. Situations would be more comfortable. You wouldn't have all the feelings of discrimination and separation and segregation.
Right. And more people would share. Like your story, like if I was a person with an unidentifiable disability or like didn't self-disclose, your story, I'd be like, well, I'm not saying anything because this person just got called out for having a disability. So why?
And you're right. That's right. You're actually, yes, 100%. Then you're like, oh my God, let me not say anything. So it's interesting. I think it's interesting. I think I've learned a lot throughout the years about many challenges. I was raised in a home where disability was looked at as a cross to bear as a child. When my grandmother lost her vision, it was like the end of the world for everyone in my house. And it was a cultural thing. It was also a lack of knowledge and understanding of disability. So once my grandmother had, talking clock, a cane, everything, color identifier, everything that she needed at home, it was like, oh, well, okay. But you know what? Maybe she can live alone.
Yeah, maybe she can live life and be okay.
Yes, maybe it's not over for her.
Right. She's not the first blind person ever. Like, you know.
Exactly. So, but but that takes, those resources, that understanding, that education. We used to do a disability etiquette and awareness training years ago. I've been actually thinking that maybe it's time to start doing it again.
Yeah,
Because individuals that were incurring disability later in life, like my grandmother, she was 50, have a hard time adjusting. They also have a hard time understanding the whole culture, disability culture, as far as what's appropriate, what's not appropriate,
yes,
what's expected, what's not accepted,
I know exactly what you mean. Yes. And there's
and
also, I think, a divide, Marily, too, in like what I've noticed, and this isn't true for everyone, but the older people with disabilities, like they'll say, well, I'm a senior, I don't have it, like, except for this cane and this walker and the fact that I tripped on the way to answer your phone call. But whereas the younger generation, and I think this is progress, a lot of them are like, yeah, I'm disabled. I want my services. I'm here to advocate for myself. And I have this disability that you never heard of this. Like, it's more about empowerment. And I think that is progress. Whereas still in the older generation, it's still more of hidden sometimes. And we're trying to get away from that.
Oh, yes. I remember when I was in my 20s, there was that big stigma with mental health. Yes. People didn't want to, talk if they went to therapy, if they were diagnosed with a mental health issue. That was very private. That generation looked at it as, they were embarrassed. I think luckily, like my daughter's generation, she's 22, they are more open to that, to saying, yes, I have a mental health issue. I address it. I'm in treatment. I take, medication. I have a hold of my life because I have been able to be diagnosed and I treat this. And I think that is a huge improvement, versus, the 80s and the 70s and the 80s when
we're getting away from that. We're getting away from that shame thing, like that, like let's not talk about it. And it's more like, no, I go to therapy and you should too. And
yes, 100%. And you also, the disabilities have changed since I started nearly 30 years ago. When I started working at HIP, most of my consumers had physical disabilities. Autism was not a big thing back in the early 90s, the way it is now. Right. Most of my consumers had cerebral palsy, spina bifida. Some of my other ones had multiple sclerosis, Down syndrome, muscular dystrophy. So there were a lot of physical like disabilities, and we address a lot of physical limitations. However, throughout the years, you have less individuals being born with cerebral palsy, of course, spina bifida. And then, more developmental disabilities came about.
Right. More awareness of people like, oh, that's autism. Oh, that's ADHD. Oh, that's a thing. That's a disability thing.
That's a thing. Yes. I remember when it would be like, he's just bad.
Yes.
He doesn't listen. He's just bad. Or I used to suffer when I used to hear even professionals, he's a little slow.
Okay.
And I was like, no. He's on the autism spectrum, or this is going on, and until this day, the older generation does have a hard time, but I think that children being born to disability today have the best resources. It's never enough, especially in a state like ours.
Yes.
My deaf community is very underserved and underrepresented. I find that you have these, you have huge deaf communities, and unfortunately they're not accessing the CILs the way that they should. And I always say it's the same thing. Like if you, spoke a deaf Chinese and you went into, came into my office, you would be lost. And I would not be able to effectively help you. And I think that's what the deaf community goes through on a daily basis.
Right. Like, I don't want to go in there. Like, do they have interpreter? Like, they don't want to deal with all that stuff. And I get that. But I also, the other side of that is I always tell people, it is not as good as it should be. So come help us. Come get involved. Come volunteer. Come, you know, because the more numbers we have, I always tell people with disabilities are the largest minority ever, but sometimes we don't assert that power. Like if you assert that power and make our policymakers pay attention, then that's
Yes.
where CILs get more funding, so we can afford more employees that can interpret and do these things. Like that's what we need. That's what I always tell people. Like channel your anger into productive ends. Like don't just call us and
Don't just call me. Yes.
Call people who aren't funding us enough or who aren't supporting, you know, changes to Medicaid and Social Security. Like go yell at them. You know,
No,
go
you're
vote
right.
them out.
And I think that a unified initiative that disability is not just developmental, you know, DD here, that disability is not just, you know, brain injury here. As a whole community, as a huge population of individuals with disabilities, if individuals with disabilities all come together, it is very impactful. You know, we are a strong group. And I think that there also needs to be more unity within the disabled community.
Exactly. And that's what independent living has been all about, is breaking down those walls. Because I mean, and we've seen if anybody's listening, it's been like, well, I don't know if it makes a difference. Well, people with disabilities are the ones that stopped Obamacare from being repealed. Like it was them and ADAPT and people from Nickel and their stories that stopped the changes to Medicaid and the Obamacare from being repealed. It was those stories and that made people pay attention. So there is a lot of power in this community. And if we work together, there could be beneficial changes. Now, of course, not everybody's needs are exactly the same, but a lot of them are. We'd all benefit from Social Security saving limits going up or earning limits going up. So I just think that people should really think about that and think about how they can get involved. And, you know, I was going to ask you, Marily, I have 2 more questions for you. You know, I don't like you can talk forever. And but 2 more questions for you. My first one would be, sometimes I get the question, like, I want to get involved, how should I? And how would you answer that? Like, if you were like a person looking to get involved, what would your answer to that be?
Well, you know, when I get people ask, how can I help? I always say, listen, give us a call. You know, come and join our activities, our programming, not as a volunteer to serve people with disabilities, but to be integrated. Because I think that integration is key. You know, when you have programs and you have centers and you have people that have disabilities and people that don't have disabilities, and they have an opportunity to interact, to become friends, I think that's true power. I like to tell people, come visit us, come, you know, volunteer at one of our programs, you know, come meet your peers, because we are all peers. Whether I have a group of a women's group, and it has become very inclusive because they're women, they have a lot in common. The disability comes in second, you know. So, and I think that sometimes we fail to recognize that, even though we're a disability-based organization, when people want to help, it's great to see the community together.
Exactly. And I think what you said is so important. Like I always tell people, you know, some people be like, how do you get a job like yours? I'm like, show up to these places. Like eventually, if you make yourself useful and just are around enough, they'll put you to work. Like if somebody, I was on the board, things happen, positions opened up. Like you start off doing one thing, you're like, oh, I'm gonna do this. Like somebody told you were gonna be, you know, vice president, you would be like, what are you talking about? Like vice president?
No, definitely not in this field. I would have been like, oh no. I'm a history major. That's not happening.
Yes. Did you ever get your history degree?
I did not. I changed my I changed my major the beginning of my junior year, which was a little late, and I ended up getting a degree in business administration with a minor in history.
Well, that would have been more useful. Then you did the right move. You did the right move.
Yeah, because at that point I was like, you know, and Google took my dream job, because I always wanted to travel with ancient artifacts, you know, before Google. Now you don't need me. I would have been out of a job.
Yes, well, good thing you didn't do that. Good thing you didn't do that. And I was going to end it by asking, what are your proudest accomplishments of your work in independent living and as director?
I think my proudest accomplishment has been kind of because of what I do, I was able to understand disability. And I think that the services that I was not only able to provide to the minority population in Hudson County, but to my immediate family. I think that working at a center not only gave me awareness, it educated me, it gave me the patience and understanding that I needed to be successful, on a personal level. And also as someone who is hard of hearing, I think that my experience has been that everything can be okay with the right support systems.
Yes.
Whether it's at work, whether it's at home. I think, and I will always believe that being informed and educated and awareness of just everything that's happening around us. It just makes the world a better place. It makes for a better work environment, for a better home life. I always tell my staff, the more information I have, information is power.
It is.
And it's what we offer our consumers. And on a personal basis, I think that just being open to change and growth has kind of like led me here.
Yeah, it seems like you grew with your CIL and your service. It's like there was a lot of personal growth, and you were able to also put this CIL on the map and put this and create and increase the services to different communities. So that's awesome. Like that's what CILs are all about. The journey.
Yeah, the long journey. We went from 2 employees to now we have, oh my God, I think we're a total of 26.
Wow.
So yes, but it has been a long journey. And we provide great services, and we have, so many great programs from, transition services through a youth case management from birth to age 14 that has completely blew up. You have so many younger parents that don't know where to start. And I believe the earlier you start, more successful your child will be. We also have a very diverse 51% of our staff happens to have disability. So they are there to also educate everyone that walks in the door. So we've been able to provide a lot of good services to thousands of people in the last 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years. See, and my CIL's just been around since 2016, so I got a long way to go before 30 years. But
you're doing great, though. You're doing really great.
It takes a journey, but I'm just so happy to have you, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll do this again one day, because like I said, there's so much to talk about.
Definitely. You and I, we could talk for hours. 100%.
We could do our own podcast. We could do the side Marily and Donald show.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Marily. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Donald.